This Nova build will completely change the way you play and think about Nova.
This build actually sucks against Acolytes. You didn't hear anything. I didn't say anything.
Because it lets you take full advantage of her insane utility and damage scaling potential. What's good, folks? It's Nightmare Frame here with a new Warframe video coming at you with this crazy Nova Inherit build. Alright, now some of you that are watching the background footage are confused and are asking, what is actually going on? This idea was originally something that the homie Asian Invasion has done and called it Nova Inherit. And in that video, he's using armor strip and some funny Incarnon features to have it scale. But someone from my community has found something funnier, and that doesn't require armor stripping. This whole build revolves around Nova's fourth ability, Molecular Prime. This ability has two functions, to either slow or speed up enemies, depending on your modified strength. The more strength you have, the slower enemies are, and the less strength you have, the faster they become. All the modified speed applied affects enemies' movement and their actions. So the faster the enemies are, the more damage they deal to you, because they attack faster and frequently. The amount of negative strength needed to speed up enemies can go pretty low, thanks to the mods Overextended and Power Donation, leaving you with 10% strength, which is quite staggering. However, the slow is capped at 75% speed reduction, which requires 145% strength. However, that's just the slowing effects. Additional strength has other benefits. This ability also applies a 200% damage vulnerability debuff on the enemies, regardless of your strength. This damage vulnerability only applies to the enemy's health and not other defenses. And this is important, and when I say health, I don't just mean the red bar. I mean anything that's not a shield or overguard. Molecular Prime not only applies a debuff on enemies, but it also has a chain reaction explosion that can ripple through hordes of enemies. However, this explosion needs a catalyst to set it off. A single enemy needs to die for it to cause a chain reaction explosion. The explosion radius scales off your range stat, and the explosion damage scales with strength. So I'm slowly hinting at a strength Nova build. However, this ability does not have a set range, but it expands over time, and this expansion growth scales with your duration, and this build requires all three of those main stats. But before that, did you know Molecular Prime has a few features that has it inherit a few traits from the tool that was used to initiate the detonation chain reaction. For example, in Asian's video, he demonstrated that when you kill enemies with a melee, it will turn Molecular Prime into melee damage without any mod scaling, but will trigger melee conditions. For example, the Dexterity Arcanes, which requires melee kills to grant base damage to your guns. But here I killed one target, but since my Molecular Prime used that one target to turn that chain reaction into melee damage, I was able to gain the full benefits of the Dexterity Arcane. This also works for Merciless, unfortunately not for Deadhead. Here's another thing. Did you know that Molecular Prime can also inherit Incarnon perks? Namely, the Devouring Attrition buff that you get from Fenmore, Felarx, and the Laetum. This is a final damage multiplier to any non-critical hit. And this, my friends, is multiplicative to the strength scaling on Molecular Prime, meaning pairing this buff with a high-strength Molecular Prime build allows you to nuke Steel Path. However, that's when armor becomes an issue. But you may have noticed I'm not using any armor strip on this particular build, and that is thanks to my Helminth Ability, Zata's Whisper. I've explained this ability a lot of times, but if you want full details on everything it does, do go check out my Banshee and Saren versus level 9k. But for the sake of this video, I'll go over the important things that are actually required for this ability to synergize with the Molecular Prime nuke. Usually when you shoot an enemy, you will see the different types of damage you deal. And in this case, this is just simple multi-shot, and Zata's Whisper adds another instance of damage. Notice now, we're dealing additional shots. Usually you saw 2, but now we're getting extra shots because this ability coats your weapons with an elemental damage multiplier that doesn't combine with your modded or innate elements. Think of it like Toxic Clash. It scales with a percentage of your weapon's damage, base damage, elemental damage multipliers, critical damage multipliers, and it double dips with faction damage multipliers, allowing it to deal 2 times its damage. But it also scales with external damage multipliers, and it double dips with a damage multiplier that we just spoke about. You see where this is going? Do you see where this is going? And now Molecular Prime is inheriting that buff along with the additional hits from Zata's Whisper, which is also multiplied by the Molecular Prime debuff. So let's go over the important things that we need for this build for it to actually work. 1. Strength to affect both Molecular Prime and Zata's Whisper. 2. Range. That increases the explosion radius of Molecular Prime. 3. Duration. This helps Molecular Prime expand to hit more enemies and gives us a decent uptime on Zata's Whisper. 4. Use either the Felarx, the Fenmore, or the Laetum with the Devouring Attrition perk to help multiply the damage on Zata and Molecular Prime. And number 5, do not forget to have a primed faction damage mod on your weapon. This helps both Zata and Molecular Prime to increase the damage output. So with all that information, let's go see how this build works step by step in Steel Path. Okay, here we are in Steel Path, hanging out with my buddy here, Doriga, because his role is actually quite important on this build, and you'll see why. My focus school is Madurai, so that means I'm going to start out with 2 Void Slings. 1, 2. And if you look on the top right, I have Sling Strength for the bonus 40% strength, and Power Transfer for some additional casting speed when we transference back into our Warframe. With this, I cast my Zata's Whisper, so it is affected by Sling Strength. Now let's go find some victims. Press 4, everybody's affected, shoot 1. Beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful. Tell me that wasn't beautiful. And that's just 1 shot. This is a 1-shot build, ladies and gentlemen. However, there was a downside. If you get a really bad tile set, well, it's going to suffer a little bit. Because you're essentially slowing down enemies. And that does affect the spawn rate. So you need to find a nice, dense tile set with a bunch of enemies. And remember when I said that Doriga is going to play an important part here? Well, pay attention. What is that? Archon Stretch. But Nova doesn't do any electric type of ability damage, but the Doriga does, thanks to its Arc Coil. Since that counts as ability damage, it also helps trigger Archon Stretch on my Nova build, which is a little nice energy income. You don't necessarily have to do this, but if you want to, it is so damn useful. Just like that, kill 1 enemy and everybody else dies. And remember when I said about dense tile set? This is not the best tile set. It is quite wide, and enemies are spawning from every single direction, which does hurt it a little bit. And notice I'm not even using the Incarnon mode of my Fenmore. Now remember when I said about shields being an issue? Well, that does become an issue when you're dealing with Acolytes. So that means at least make sure your weapon is modded for Corrosive as one of its main elemental damage buffs, so you can deal with that Acolyte fairly quickly. However, if the Acolyte loses its shields, you have a chance of nuking it with your Molecular Prime chain reaction. But if you want a safer guaranteed nuke on the Acolyte, you can run something like the Vassalok to armor strip it. Also, make sure you get rid of that Ancient Healer immediately. And the best part is once you kill that Ancient Healer, it will trigger a chain reaction, shooting this guy, and everyone else does. Here you go, an Xmas unit. These guys are notorious thanks to their overguard, but we can just kill them. And it also causes the chain reaction, because once that overguard is depleted, then that guy is immediately affected by Molecular Prime. All right, here we go. We got an Acolyte. This braid's not violence. Okay, it's this guy. It's okay. It's okay. So he's got a shield. Just wait for him to get a bit closer.
He puts that annoying bubble on me. Just dodge roll out of it. All right. I mean, dealing damage to him is also causing the chain reaction on the other guys. Which is quite hilarious. Oh, let's get rid of these guys first. They die easy, no worries. There we go. The Acolyte is still alive. Unfortunately, you know, the Acolyte can be quite annoying, so make sure you deal with him fairly quickly. You can use your Laetum, your Felarks, but if you want, you can also use your melee weapon. Let's go over the additional items that you require to make this build work. Number 1, I highly recommend you use a different Nova, meaning the build that you need for this Nova requires a completely different mod loadout. But as you can see, I'm using one Nova and the build still works, because it's definitely going to be better with Umbral mods, and I'll explain why. The first thing is that we need Archon Shards. Most importantly, the Amber Shards for casting speed. Casting speed is so important. And finally, Blue Town Forge for the energy maximum, since I'm not going to be running Prime Flow on this build. Alright, taking a look at the Nova build. In the aura, I have Corrosive Projection for the minus 18% armor, which is really good because it's a DPS increase, and actually way better than running Growing Power. Remember when I said Umbral mods would be really nice? Well, it's because you can run Umbral Vitality and Umbral Intensify. Because if you have that, and Transient Fortitude will grant you 210% bonus strength, and slightly tanky because this is a health tank build. My strength is coming from Maturai, by modded strength, and Molt Augmented. All of this is to increase the damage on Molecular Prime and multiplier on Xata's Whisper. Range at 175% with Archon Stretch and Augur Reach. For the people who didn't pay attention during the Steel Path demonstration, the Dariga procs this. Streamlined for the efficiency. If you want, you can run Equilibrium. Unfortunately, it did not have the capacity to run that mod, but Streamline is still really nice. And 128% duration with Prime Continuity. It's lowered slightly because of Transient Fortitude, and this duration is actually what we need. We don't want to have so much duration because if we have a lot of duration, Molecular Prime is going to keep expanding and affecting enemies outside of our reach, slowing down enemy spawns, which reduces the kills per minute and can hurt life support. And finally, Arcane Guardian just for the tankiness when you take damage. Looking at my Fenmore build, you can use the Felarks or the Laetum, up to you, but for this loadout, I'm using the Fenmore. The first evolution is going to be the projectile flight speed increase. Evolution 3, increase the magazine capacity. This only works in its regular mode and not the Incarnon. You can use anything else you want here, but of course this is just the better choice. Evolution 4, with that negative crit chance to help increase the damage with Devouring Attrition, which is our final perk. So 50% chance to deal 2000% damage on non-critical hits. And now onto the Fenmore build. Crazy amounts of raw base damage coming from Serration and Primal Merciless. Usually you do not put these two together, but it's actually worth it for this particular build. And you may have noticed I have insane amounts of elemental damage mods. All of this is to buff Xata's Whisper. Because remember, it scales from base damage, elemental damage mods, and faction damage multipliers, as this double dips, as this mod helps out Molecular Prime and Xata's Whisper. Funny enough, the Felarks does have an advantage over the Fenmore because shotguns are the only weapons currently to have 2 primed elemental damage mods. So then again, this is up to you. Just a reminder, they just need to have Devouring Attrition and of course, lowered crit chance. And now moving on to the Dariga build. I'll take that for now. So nasty. Anyway, Arc Coil. This is an ability which also helps trigger Archon Stretch. Calculated Shot, so that Sentinel attacks. Guardian, so it gives me back some shields. Momentous Bond, just for some additional elemental damage when you kill Xmas units. And Mystic Bond. This allows me to get a free cast after the Sentinel has used 5 abilities of its own. Tenacious Bond, you don't need this. This is just for another build. You can put whatever else you want here. But the most important thing you want is Manifold Bond. This reduces the ability cooldown of my Sentinel when I kill enemies affected by 3 or more status effects. And the Dariga is going to apply those status effects by itself. And of course, me. This is the Hellstrom.
the weapon that I'm going to be using. It's just there to prime enemies for some radiation and toxin. Very useful against ancient healers. All right, folks, this is Nova Inherit. For the people who haven't even tried this before, please do go try it out because it is insanely fun and it's so satisfying to see the crazy explosion chain reaction. Anyway, folks, that has been it from me. I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to leave a like, share, and subscribe for more Warframe content, streams, and so much more. Do refer to the description. Thanks for watching, and as always, a peace. Bye-bye now.